Welcome to the vineyard. I'm just finishing off some last minute trimming. And I've just done my last spray and everything, and we're netting tomorrow because the grapes are starting. I don't know if you can see this. The grapes are starting to colour up. We're starting to get a bit of veraison, and you can see some birds are having a go at a few of them. So we've got to make sure that our crop doesn't fly north for the winter. So I got a great question the other day, and the question that I was asked was, how come there are roses on the end of grapevine rows? Now you'll see here where I am, no roses. So why is it that some vineyards have roses and why is it that some vineyards don't? And I've heard all sorts of weird and wonderful explanations like, oh, the roses impart a flavour to the wine. Oh, the roses put out phenolics into the ground, or they put out special proteins that the vines take up and makes them healthier. Even if they did, it would only help a couple of vines in on the rows. So there's all sorts of weird theories about why roses are there. The short answer is they look good. But there's more to it. And it goes back to 1851 in France. It's a really interesting story, and it's probably worth talking about for a second. So there was odium, which is a disease called powdery mildew, which is not actually a mildew. It's an odium. It's a eukaryotic cell, and it tends to flow with water, and it splashes up from the vineyard floor with rain. That came to France from England via Belgium, and it hit French vineyards really badly in 1851, and it was starting to cause all sorts of economic problems. And so there were great thinkers and people like Louis Pasteur and everyone else in France. And Louis Pasteur, by the way, was a world-renowned agricultural scientist. I know he's famous for the vaccination for rabies, but he was actually really famous before that for his work with poultry. Anyway, he was involved in the French wine industry and trying to find a cure. And eventually it came to a grower down in the Medoc, the Comte de la Verne, and I apologise to the Francophiles out there if I've got the translation or the pronunciation wrong. But he came up with the idea of spraying sulfur powder onto the vine leaves. And it wasn't very popular because people were worried about, well, what will the sulfur do to the flavours of the wine and everything else, and quite rightly. And it took quite some time for growers to get used to how to use sulfur effectively. And there were great rewards put up for the best way of doing it. And there was all sorts of ways that people were trying to use sulfur. But around that same time, there was actually some really forward-thinking people who thought, I wonder if there's a canary in the coal mine. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with the theory of a canary in a coal mine, but there are gases that are released in coal mines that are quite toxic to people. The idea was you take down a small animal like a canary in a cage. If that animal falls dead, you know you have to get the workers out or else they're going to fall dead. Canaries saved countless thousands of lives in coal mines. They were thinking maybe there's a plant that we can use in vineyards to do a similar thing that will let us know, hey, our vineyard's about to get this odium, this powdery mildew. And so the growers came up with the idea of planting roses at the end for that reason. So just like a canary in a coal mine, a rose in a vineyard was supposed to, because roses get similar diseases to grapes, a rose was supposed to show you, oh, the vines are about to get a disease. And that was used as an indication in the early times as to when to put out a sulfur spray. The problem with that is the part that you see of powdery mildew is the furry bit on the leaf, which is actually the sexual spore. By the time you see that, the plant has had odium, it's been infected by odium for quite some time. So by the time the roses started to show powdery mildew, the vines already had it, and sulfur's really only good as a preventative spray. So it was tried out. Like most things, when you're fighting a new disease, you trial all sorts of cures and all sorts of practices. Roses were one of those practices. They were supposed to be the canary in the coal mine. But it turned out that it was an ineffective means of prediction of disease. we now have much better understanding of odium, and we can predict according to weather reasonably well as to when we're going to have problems with powdery mildew, and we spray sulfur on the vines before that weather event. So roses now on grapevine rows are really just there for the tourists. And you'll often notice when you go to vineyards, there'll be a lovely driveway and lots of vines going up the hill, and there'll be roses planted at the end of all of those rows. But if you go around the corner out to the back where the proper wine is grown, there won't be a single rose to be seen. There is one other theory, and that was that the roses were on the end of the rows to tell the horses when to turn around. I think anyone who's ever worked with horses would be quite insulted by that theory, because if you're a good operator, you should be able to control your horses without needing roses to tell you when to turn. So these days, roses are actually more of a pain than anything else. Your nets get caught on them. When you're herbicide spraying, your boom nozzles can flick up when they get caught in the roses. They're more trouble than they're worth. But they do look good up the main driveway. So I hope that answers the question about why are there roses at the end of grapevine rows. And this starts my new series on managing your small crop of grapes. So I hope that you can join me over the next 12 months where I'll go through a full season on a vineyard, and I will show you how to manage the crop to get off some wine. So I hope you enjoy that. Please do subscribe to my channel. I come out with a new video most weeks, and I hope that you enjoy joining me in the farming game, because it's a lot of fun and it's very rewarding.